sadistic treatment of detainees in the American prison camp. Experts in intelligence tell us that if what SAR says is true, some soldiers at Guantanamo have undermined the war on terror, bungling the interrogation of important prisoners. You will also see previously secret emails from FBI agents at Guantanamo that warn FBI headquarters that prisoners are being tortured. A lot of what you're about to hear is difficult to listen to and maybe even harder to believe.
I think the harm that we're doing there far outweighs the good. And I believe it's inconsistent with American values. In fact, I think it's fair to say that it's the moral antithesis of what we want to stand for as a country.
Sergeant Eric Saar volunteered for Guantanamo Bay in 2002. He was a U.S. Army linguist and expert in Arabic with a top-secret security clearance. He was assigned to translate during interrogations. The prisoners, about 600 in all, were mostly from the battlefields of Afghanistan, and Saar couldn't wait to get at them after what the administration had been saying about them.
These are among the most dangerous, best-trained, vicious killers on the face of the earth.
And with that in mind, Sergeant Saar went to work, but was surprised by what he found.
How many do you think were what we were told were the worst of the worst, real terrorists?
At best, I would say there were a few dozen.
A few dozen?
A few dozen.
Out of 600?
Yes.
Who are the rest of these guys?
Some of them were conscripts who actually were forced to fight for the Taliban, so actually had taken up arms against us, but had little or no choice in the matter. Some of them were individuals who were picked up by the Northern Alliance, and we have no idea why they were there. And we didn't know exactly what their connections were to terrorism.
However they got there, Saar and the rest of Guantanamo's intelligence personnel were told that the captives were not prisoners of war and therefore were not protected by the Geneva Convention.
Your training in intelligence had told you what about the Geneva Conventions?
That they were never to be violated. As a matter of fact, the training for interrogators themselves, their entire coursework falls under the umbrella of you never violate the Geneva Conventions.
If the rules of the Geneva Convention did not apply, what rules did apply?
I don't think anybody knew that.
And so, Sergeant Saar told us some U.S. military intelligence personnel used cruelty and even bizarre sexual tactics against the prisoners. Saar has written a book, Inside the Wire, about his experiences at Guantanamo. He told us about one interrogation in particular, in which he translated for a female interrogator who was trying to break a high-priority prisoner, a Saudi, who'd been in flight school in the United States.
As she stood in front of him, she slowly started to unbutton her army blouse. She had on, underneath the army blouse, a tight brown army t-shirt. Touched her breasts and said, "Don't you like these big American breasts?" She wanted to create a barrier between this detainee and his faith. And if she could somehow sexually entice him, he would feel unclean in an Islamic way. He would not be able to pray and go before his God and gain that strength. So maybe the next day, he would be able to start cooperating and start talking to her.
But he wasn't talking, so Saar told us the interrogator increased the pressure.
She started to unbutton her pants and reached and put her hands in her pants and then started to circle around the detainee. And when she had her hands in her pants, apparently she used something to put what appeared to be menstrual blood on her hand, but it in fact was ink. When she circled around the detainee, she pulled out her hand, which was red, and said, "I'm actually menstruating right now, and I'm touching you. Does that please your God? Does that please Allah?" And then he kind of got pent up and shied away from her, and she then took the ink and wiped it on his face and said, "How do you like that?"
Then the interrogator sent the prisoner back to his cell with a message.
Before we left, she said, "Have fun trying to pray tonight while there's no water in your cell," meaning that she was going to have the water turned off in his cell, so he then could not go back and become ritually clean. So he then, therefore, could not pray.
And you thought what?
I know that the individual that we were talking to that night was a bad individual, someone that I hope he's in captivity forever. I hope he never goes anywhere. But I felt awful that night. I felt dirty and disgusting.
But you know, what you have here is a Saudi training at an American flight school, just like the 9/11 hijackers. You know there are people at home watching this right now saying, hey, you got to do what you got to do.
I do understand that. And the fact is, number one, it's ineffective. There are much better methods that were being employed at Guantanamo Bay that yielded the little bit of intelligence that we did receive. And it wasn't methods like this.
We talked to 3 interrogators who were at Guantanamo at the same time that SAR was there, and they told us the sexual tactics were well known and even had a name. They called it the sex-up approach.
Did it work? Did he start cooperating?
It did not work. And from what I later learned, that detainee remained uncooperative. It's impossible to try to build a connection and establish trust. You are now relying solely on fear to get the detainee to cooperate. And I think that's an enormous mistake. I think many of the FBI agents on the base felt as though that was a mistake also.
The FBI does its own questioning of prisoners at Guantanamo, and those agents have been writing emails classified secret to FBI headquarters.